a conversation, and I will write it down. So we've got Dan, who played Mulligrub, and Luke, who's Cocledemoy. So let's start with Luke. Cocledemoy I think, became because you open and close the play.
Yeah.
And it seems to be a play about Franceschina and Freeville and that, but it's really your play, isn't it?
Well, in the way Mike did it, I felt like he kind of gave Cocledemoy a bit more power than he did. So yeah, like you said, he gave the prologue to Cocledemoy and the epilogue to was already Cocledemoy's. And I think it's kind of become a nice framing device that while all of the main plot is going on and Freeville gets his punishment, as is Franceschina, Cocledemoy is kind of a constant source of madness who, no matter how crazy his deeds, he's always getting away with it. And I think that kind of links in really well with kind of what Marston was trying to do in terms of shocking and trying to challenge people's ideas and what they thought of the society at the time. So yeah, I think it's kind of a good indicator of what Marston was doing. Yeah.
Do you think that, I mean, one of the biggest challenges must have been, I'm probably putting words in my mouth here, but to navigate that path of insanity as you go through. I mean, but very controlled in many bits, but veering off. I mean, that's quite a challenge to keep together and to put on. How did you go about working with that?
Well, I guess we started, me and Mike, just we had a week talking about the character and just like trying to get our heads into him because he's just so hard to figure out. And he's one of those characters where it's so easy to be like, why is he doing that? And because there are no answers really. I mean, he just does it because he can. And I mean, there's a bit of a hint of a motive in terms of Mulligrub constantly cursing Cocledemoy every time Cocledemoy does something, so that spurs him on. But I feel like Cocledemoy would keep doing it even if he didn't have the cursing on him.
It's just fun.
Yeah, it's just fun. And like Michael Billington came and I was talking to him afterwards, and he was saying that the interesting thing about Freeville and Cocledemoy is that they are just sadists, in his opinion, and I think that is a thing. But in terms of the rehearsals, that was a challenge to find, because first I had to free myself up to play the manic character, and then having to reel it back in to find the method in the madness. But yeah, it was a tough ask, but it was a lot of fun, and I guess just really thinking about everything that Cocledemoy says, and Mike's really good at like making you sure you know exactly what the meaning is, and just being like, okay, why is he saying that? Okay, he's saying that because of this, and that leads to that, and that leads to that, and that way you can kind of find the pathway. Yeah.
Dan, as Mulligrub, you had a different kind of madness in that you went from a sort of had to go from these depths of melancholy to fits of rage at points, which is a very difficult thing to sustain and balance. And I think you did remarkably well doing that. But how, again, that's something which takes a lot of work, a lot of rehearsal to get to. How did you approach those kind of things?
The changes were a really, really tough part, and I think it took a while before they started working really well. And I think you need to focus on the two different parts of his personality first before you sort of really nail those changes, because you have to get how, like in the barber scene, how pleased he is and how like he enjoys these these luxuries like getting his hair cut, and sort of how much he enjoys the salmon, and once you sort of hopefully nail those like down a bit and really sort of get this guy who's really enjoys these sort of animal things. And then after that, you start focusing on his like really depressive bouts, and sort of how he thinks the whole world and God is out to get him and stuff. And once you've got those two, then the changes started to sort of be a bit easier. But it was a really tough thing to.
It's like the higher he climbs,
exactly, the harder he falls, and he falls many hard times.
I always, watching and reading the play, I always think that Mulligrub is seems to me to be the most rooted in the original period, in the terms of social standing, with where he is as a landlord, a vintner, relative wealth to his customers, that kind of thing. This is really. But I mean, was that for you, but also I guess for you as well, Luke? Did you ever use any of that historical stuff? Is that a useful way of to get into a character, or or do you go purely from looking at text and what comes out of that?
I think the biggest part of what you were saying that's sort of come into the character, I think, has ended up was being this obsession with class, this sort of slightly dated way of seeing, all of these different, really, really sort of complex ways that classes interact, and how sort of the language at several points really hints at Mulligrub thinking he's a little higher than he actually is, like when he's talking to Luke in the barber scene, is my worshipful whatever, and that really helped because it's knowing the language stuff really helped, thanks to Mike, because it sort of reveals something really interesting about his character, that he's sort of really aspirational and slimy like that, and that sort of hopefully made its way.
And I think it was kind of slightly different for Cocledemoy because he doesn't really obey the rules of any society in any way. But there are elements of it, the way his obsession with the word worshipful, for example, is he uses it in the sense that, like, you are worshipful to me, and then there's a bit when he becomes the barber, he's like, now worshipful Cocledemoy, so I'm going to worship him and then destroy him. So that does help in that sense. But again, it comes from, for me, it comes from the text and just like figuring out what is going on in that guy's head. But yeah, it does help, and Mike is and yourself are really good at giving us that information.
I think this is particularly for Cocledemoy, it seems to me, as being a character who mirrors Freeville very closely. That if Freeville, I mean, you said earlier that they're kind of both sadists, but Freeville is still to a certain extent constrained by his social class and his upbringing, whereas Cocledemoy just is not. And there's that sort of scene where I know Mike talked long and hard about how the scenes work, where you have Freeville and Malora, Freeville giving a speech in support of prostitutes, and then straight away the next scene is Cocledemoy and Mary Foch. And I wondered sort of whether you had any thoughts about that scene, perhaps, but also the kind of language that Cocledemoy uses. It seems to me that he ghosts, not only worshipful, he ghosts whoever he happens to be with and echoes back and forth. So he uses worshipful to sort of so parody and satirise what Mulligrub does, but he also uses Latinate expressions absolutely correctly and without thinking about it when talking to Freeville or right at the end, for sake of wit, that kind of thing. And then goes into those crazy scenes when he's got the bastardised Greek, where it just means nothing. I mean, how did you go about tackling all of those different things? Or did you just have to?
Well, in terms of the link with Freeville, I mean, that was one of those things where when you get into a rehearsal with the other actors, you can see like little things that you can do to kind of match it up. But I think it was interesting in that Freeville is. He puts himself within the society. He's got his friends and his cronies and his wife to be and his prostitute. So he kind of has a path that's set by the society, even with his kind of rogueries. But again, Cocledemoy is kind of free from everything. Like, he chooses just to be with Mary Foch because he likes Mary Foch, but he picks up Holofernes. He tries to get a guy. Happy to try and pick up Mrs. Mulligrub before you're dead. So again, that kind of freedom in the character kind of helped with all of that ideas. In terms of the language as well, it was actually very helpful. The kind of the words that Cocledemoy uses, and like the little phrases like "turd on a tile stone" and "I'll go cack in my pewter." It helps you summarize the guy in your head. And then the bastard Greek scene as well. I mean, Mike contacted his friend and colleague who replied saying, "This just means nothing. This, what are you going to do?" And we kind of had to think of what he might be trying to say. But I think the fun of it was that he's using it to mock Franceschina's inability to maybe know all English or all languages, whereas Cocledemoy is to himself is so clever, so sharp that he can just invent a language on the spot, just to toy with someone. So I think that helped with the kind of that inventiveness, helped to just kind of with the ebb and flow of the character in that sense. Yeah.
I mean, I was also thinking, because, again, sorry, this is back to Luke again, because you were in Mike's last production as playing Penitent Brothel in A Mad World, My Masters, and I was just wondering how the two plays and your experience of rehearsing two plays differed. They're vastly different plays in many respects, although they come at a very similar time.
Yeah.
Have you found this a very different process to tackling Mad World?
It's interesting actually, because both I've been in the subplot character for both times, so it's interesting how they're both more comical, but I guess if anything, I was kind of the more Mulligrub kind of character. Well, not entirely. There's not clear links, but Penitent Brothel is kind of almost like a Malheureux kind of character. He's tortured and introverted and doesn't really know what to do, but is youthful and excited about life. And Cocledemoy is experienced and knows everything as far as he's aware. So there's been massive differences in terms of the characters in that sense. In terms of just the working, I feel like this play is much more wacky. Even though A Mad World, My Masters is called A Mad World, My Masters, I feel like the world that Marston is portraying is much more insane than anything that Middleton did, and I think that we've kind of, in terms of this production, we've really kind of grabbed a hold of the kind of the zigzaggy quality of how every character just switches so quickly. So I think that's been that stands out for me in terms of this production, whereas Mad World was the character that I was portraying was much more controlled and restrained within himself. Okay,
great. Let's leave it there, I think, because thank you very much.
No,